Afternoon, everyone. We've just got quite a few people in the lobby that we're letting in, so we'll give it a couple of seconds, and then hopefully we'll let everybody in, and then we'll make a start. It's always quite busy at this part of the session, just with everybody joining, so lots of beeping on the screen as we've got people joining. So we'll give it another couple of seconds, and then we'll go straight into it. Okay, great. So I think we'll make a start. The first couple of minutes are based around introductions and what this afternoon session is all focused on. So first of all, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us on what is episode 2 of our webinar series, Screen Time with Kerry and Kelly. Today we're actually joined by John Matthews as our guest speaker from Yoti. Yoti, put my tongue back in and call them by their right name, have really helped shape the future of digital identity verification. They've worked very, very closely with the government throughout the period in which digital identity has been at the forefront of the topics in and around right to work. So we're very lucky to have John with us today, and a little bit later into the session we are doing a Q&A, a panel discussion between Kelly and John. So thanks very much for everybody for joining. We're starting to get some good numbers of people on now. So what we'll do is we'll start, and then if anybody else joins as we go through, we'll welcome them in. So episode 2 is all about right to work. So right to work as a topic in its entirety is massively at the forefront of lots of HR and talent agendas, mainly because of the responsibility that sits with the employer, massively because of the risk associated to employing workers who don't have the correct documentation, and also the compliance element, the fines that are associated with getting it wrong are really steep and getting steeper as of next year. So it's really one of those topics that is always on an agenda, especially when we go out and talk to lots of different companies. It's always the top of the agenda. How are you verifying right to work? What does that look like? What do I legally have to do as an employer? What is legal right to work? Where does the owner sit? What can you do as an outsourced provider? What do we need to do internally? And then more recently, how has right to work changed? There was lots of changes around right to work during COVID. Some of those changes have continued through into what we now call post-COVID, and that is where we start to see a lot more of the entry of Yoti and IDSP in service providers into the right to work environment. So we'll start with some introductions. My name's Kerry Redmond. I'm the head of growth for Giant Screening. I've been in the screening industry for the last 15 years and talked to clients of all shapes and sizes in relation to solutions for their background screening efforts. Kelly, I'll hand over to you for a quick introduction.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Kelly. Kelly Pugh, Head of Product at Giant. Looking forward to answering the questions later about right to work. And as Kerry mentioned, obviously it's a very big part of most of the services and the offerings that we provide. So yeah, looking forward to getting some of the good questions from you guys.
And finally, we'll hand over to John. We've included John's or Yoti strapline there, that they're on a mission to become the world's most trusted identity platform. And I think there was a period of time leading up into the introduction of digital identity verification that Yoti almost became a household name between talent and HR departments. So John, I'll hand over to you for your introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Yeah, so I'm John Matthews from Yoti. I've been at Yoti for about 4 years now. So as Kerry said, we were one of the first approved IDSP. So I've sort of been there through post and pre-COVID. So I've seen all the changes and everything that we've had to do as a business to sort of help HR and different organisations that have needed to use it. So yeah, happy to answer any questions later.
Brill. And we've got the chat box running through the side of our presentation. So these sessions are always really good when they're interactive. So if anybody wants to ask any questions as we go through, please just pop them into the chat box. I know Kelly's going to be keeping an eye on that as we go through the session. We can answer any questions as we go through, and then we'll do a Q&A session at the end as well. So we'll make a start. So just to give you some background as to who we are, and this isn't in any way aimed at being a sales pitch, is to give you that comfort and assurance that the size and scale of our operation, we're well versed in being able to talk about subjects such as right to work. One caveat we will say is that we're not in a position to give legal advice. If you need legal advice in relation to right to work, that's something that your own internal legal counsels will be able to support you in. What we're able to do is provide that overview and insight as to the industry and what the industry is doing at this moment in time in relation to right to work against the legislation. But if there's anything specific, of course, we're happy to answer questions, but we're not here to give any specific legal advice. So Giant Screening, founded in 2017, we are a truly global organisation. We are at the forefront of a number of regulated spaces, whether that be financial services, whether that be airside, whether that be retail, hospitality. We do a lot in the care space as well, especially in that right to work world where you have high volume starters that need either instant right to work verification or very, very quick turnarounds of right to work. Then we do a lot of work in that space. We're fastest growing pre-employment screening business in the UK, and we've got over 500 clients globally. So as I said, over lots of different regulated sectors, including defence and aerospace and nuclear and into lots of other sectors as well. So we'll start then on the content and the topic. So what is right to work? So we all know right to work within the United Kingdom, and when we talk here, we're talking specifically about right to work within the United Kingdom. We're not talking about it on a global scale. So this is purely in relation to the UK. So in the United Kingdom, all employers are legally required to verify that the individuals that they are engaging with have a legal right to work in the United Kingdom. So that comes under Section 15 of the Immigration, Nationality and Asylum Act. So failure to do that, and we cover this off a little bit further on, actually results in a number of different penalties. So it gets more severe as the number of offences increases. But what the best thing to do is, and what lots of employers do now, is they build a really strong case to support their statutory defence around right to work of an individual. So they will compile lots of different documents and data, and they'll go through different processes within the background to make sure that they're able, if audited by the Home Office or any other body, they will make sure that they've got an audit trail to say, yes, such and such a body did start with us on this date, and these are the documents that were provided, or this is the digital route that was confirmed for that individual. So the right to work legislation that we talk about comes under Section 15 of the Immigration, Nationality and Asylum Act, and that is the verification of individuals' right to work in the United Kingdom. And it's all about providing that statutory defence for organisations who are legislated under the UK. So lots of terminology in this space where you can see acronyms quite a lot, and they don't always make sense. They don't always come together. So I thought what we'd do just to start with is just go through some of the acronyms that you perhaps see in some of the terminology online and things like that. So the first two both effectively mean the same thing. RTW, ETW. That is somebody's right to work in the United Kingdom, that they're able to provide the right documentation. Now, that doesn't just need to be a passport. We know that doesn't just need to be a passport. There's a whole list of documents and visas and birth certificates and things like that that can be provided for an individual. But typically we see those two abbreviations, and they're used lots in business as well between teams and things like that internally. They're the two official sort of abbreviations. An online check. So the online check is required for anybody who holds digital proof of their immigration status, so an e-visa. So this links very, very closely to a share code. So most EU citizens, whether they've now got a settled status or a pre-settled status, or those who come with a Hong Kong BNO visa, plus a few other different nationalities who fit into that mix as well, will have what's called an immigration status visa, an e-visa. Now, what that does is that generates what's called a share code. So you can see that below. The share code links to the online check, and that then provides that that individual has the right to work in the UK. So as part of the solution that either you conduct yourselves internally or an outsourced provider like us would provide, that share code would be put into the government system, Home Office system, along with that individual's date of birth, and then that will then confirm that they do have the correct visa material to be able to work in the United Kingdom, either with or without restriction. And we talk about those restrictions and how those restrictions should be logged a little bit later on. A manual right to work check. So not everybody is, one, willing, or two, able to go through either a digital right to work or an online check. So for those individuals, that identity must be confirmed in person. That individual must present with their documents, and they must be able to come to, whether it be an assessment centre, whether it be their interview, whether it be their induction on day one, with their documents in their hand, and be able to show that they are in possession of their own documents, and then that manual check will be able to be taken place there. Whoever takes that check, it's important to note that that individual stamps and signs to say, yes, I've seen a true copy of the original, and then that's been matched against the individual who's presented that document. Okay. So did you know, this is an interesting fact, and I think it's always good to share some stats as we go through. Since the start of 2018, almost 5,000 civil penalties have been issued to employers with a total value of £88.4 million. So it's really significant, the number of fines. The Home Office are very, very active in audits, in looking at individuals where they don't have the correct right to work. The fines get more severe as the number of offences increase, and I'll show you as we go through that actually becomes worse from next year when the fine total is increasing again. There's some stats there on landlords. So for anybody who has a property, for not verifying the identity of an individual living within your property, again, there's quite significant fine increases coming, and there's already quite a lot of fines that have been hit out since 2018. So this is where right to work has changed, certainly since April of last year. IDSP is a digital identity, so identity service provider. They're officially appointed suppliers, so like Yoti, who are able to utilise their technology, IDVT, to validate the right to work of British or Irish passport holders digitally. So they are able to work with their technology under the guidelines set out by the government to confirm that that individual does have the right to work in the United Kingdom, but also it then takes away the onus on you having to do that as the employer. So you'll see those terminologies as we go through, but that's what they both mean. So updates that came out this morning, very, very brief because they're not overly relevant to where we're at, but you can just see there there's some updates there, firstly relating to digital certificates of applications, and we will share copies of these slides after the webinar as well. But what this is aimed at is showing that the updates are there, they're regular, they come through from the government. These in this case came through right in time for a webinar, not necessarily massively relevant, but what it does show is that we are constantly seeing changes in the right to work framework that the government ask us to work against. So some updates there for you to just have a very quick read through. So this is the question that everybody always asks. What do you need to do as an employer to ensure that you're meeting the standard laid out by the government to ensure that you are effectively validating an individual's right to work? So there are 3 different ways in which you can do that, and we've gone through a couple of those already. So you do that manually, i.e. on a day 1 or an interview check, that person comes with their passport and any other associated materials, or if they don't have a passport, they come with the documents that are defined within the list on .gov.uk as to what is deemed acceptable right to work within the United Kingdom, and that's validated face-to-face on either at their interview, during their induction, or as part of their onboarding process. That's done face-to-face and manually. Via an online check, so again, documents would still need to be seen face-to-face, but those individuals who are able to present with a share code, if they share their share code with you and their date of birth, that check can then be done via the online system that the Home Office allow for use. That service can be outsourced, so that can come through to a service provider like Giant, or you can choose to do that yourselves internally, or via a digital check. So that links into Yoti or any other digital service provider. So for British or Irish passport holders who hold a current active passport, they will be able to have their right to work verified digitally under the new framework. So you can see the documents there. It's very much around what is appropriate, applicable to that individual. So right to work, sometimes when it comes to visas can be a little bit of a minefield, but the .gov.uk website is a phenomenal source of advice and guidance for what is acceptable and what an individual needs to provide in order to meet the criteria of having the right to work within the UK. But typically what we see is that somebody has a passport, they have a biometric residence permit, they have a visa with comments on it that might be restrictions. So they might have certain periods of time during the academic year, for example, that they're allowed to work. It's really important that if you do have an individual on any type of visa with remarks, that those remarks are clearly logged and date stamped, and then that is continually on a cycle of being validated for as long as that individual is with you within the organisation. It's really important to note that it's the employer's responsibility to validate the validity of those documents that's presented by the candidate. So when we talk about right to work and how it's changed, and we'll cover that in just a second, actually going through a digital solution will deliver more compliant results consistently, because you are relying on the technology to conduct those checks as opposed to the people conducting those checks. And it is obviously then delivered against that framework. You can no longer accept EU passports or ID cards as proof to right to work in the UK. An online or a share code must be completed in most cases. So if an individual does present you the incorrect documents, then they will need to go ahead and register for a share code and come back with that information in order for you then to validate. That person cannot work until that has been done. So how has right to work changed? So historically, right to work's always been verified in person. I think pre-COVID, we all remember the process of somebody coming in with their passport on day one or during their interview process and presenting their documents, taking a scanned copy of it and signing to say, yes, I've seen such and such a body's document. During COVID, in order to get a workforce moving again, there was lots of people working from home. There was lots of people who were needing to go into roles, for example, within the NHS. And they effectively, from the March of 2020 through until September 22, adjustments were made that those checks could be done digitally. What that then created was the government being able to, sorry, it should be September 20 there, the government effectively in April 22 launched the digital right to work scheme, and that allowed an employer to partner with an ID service provider to supply a solution that would fully curate the right to work candidate journey digitally. So an IDSP is considered to be to allow for consistency in approach, meet the requirements, and then reduce the internal administration for organisations, especially for companies where they have really high volume hires within a period of time. So yeah, it's really important that as of April last year, the government legislation changed that now means that organisations are able to verify British and Irish nationals digitally, as long as it's in line with that ID service provider. So the increase in fines. So this is something I mentioned very briefly. The Home Office come out really regularly and audit lots of different companies. Sometimes it's done after an investigation, other times it is done without warning, and they turn up and do a check. The civil penalty as of 2024 will be increasing, so that will go up to £45,000 per illegal worker for the first breach, and up to £60,000 per worker for repeat breaches. So that's as of the start of 2024. So it talks about each person in the chain, but typically the person who is in the engager, the contractor issuer, is the person who will be liable for that fine. So as of next year, £45,000 per illegal worker if it's your first offence. If it's your second offence, third offence and onwards, it's up to £60,000. There's also other fines and penalties right the way up to businesses being closed down as a result of failure to comply with right to work checks. So IDSP, digital right to work. What is it, and what does it do? So there's two routes really, two groups of people or two groups of candidates. So route one, or group one, would be UK, Ireland passport holders. They must have a valid Irish passport or British passport, and they must be able to travel through the system. So that system is the ID framework, where the government has set out a list of criteria that individual must meet. The individual will typically upload their passport, and then they will take a selfie of themselves, and then the two will be compared against each other, and it will be validated at the end. For everybody else, those individuals don't meet the criteria against IDVT. So what they will need to do is go through the other two options, so whether that be the manual option of documents being viewed face to face, and the share code option and the online check with the Home Office and their supplier. So what we'll do now is we will hand over to the we'll go through to our panel event, the Yoti discussion. So this is where Kelly and John are able to really bring their expertise to the discussion, and you don't have to listen to just me talking anymore. So Kelly, John, welcome to the webinar. The first question that we've been talking about amongst ourselves, and I'll read it out for everybody that's on the call, is: can you tell us about the government, how the government came about making changes to the right to work solution, and how the introduction of IDSP came about? So John, I'll come to you on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So obviously during COVID, where it just wasn't feasible for someone to go in and actually see someone face to face, they relaxed the rules where you could, literally do like a video call and hold up your passport and say, this is me, and you accepted that as proof of right to work. That obviously was very open to fraud. It's very difficult to look at a passport in that sort of environment and confidently say it's the same person, but that was the only way that it could really sort of be done then. They realized that this was something that was going to then be carrying on after COVID, because people working remotely, it's not, doesn't work, someone having to travel into an office. So it was like, okay, well, we'll carry on doing it, but we'll make it more secure now. We'll have these IDSPs that can do the verification of the document and give you that assurance that it's a genuine document and it is, that person has got the right to work. So that's how it sort of came about. It was obviously prompted from COVID, but as continues. So that isn't something that stopped just because COVID isn't really a sort of an issue so much now.
And do you guys feel like you've been going on an ever-evolving journey from the point where this discussion all came about around how we could continue with a digital verification? Because I know, thinking back to the time during COVID, there was lots of discussion around companies like Giant and other service providers in the industry saying, actually, we can make this work moving forward. Have you felt that journey's really evolved and the government's become more open to the idea of things being done digitally, or do you feel that there was some resistance as you went through those changes with them?
I mean, they've been quite open to it. I mean, at one point they were going to, it was going to sort of stop completely. So it was going to go back to the in-person, face-to-face. And there was obviously a lot of pushback on that from employers, companies like yourselves, where it just wasn't feasible. We can't now. People are working remotely. Not many people are going into the office like they used to. People are working abroad. They're not even working in the same country. So the government were open to that and said, okay, well, we'll carry on doing it, but we'll just have to make sure it's more secure. So they are open to a certain degree, but what the government are like, there's certain things that they're not. But nothing's changed that much since it started. So it's been kept quite stable. Luckily, they haven't kept moving the goalposts, and it took a while to get to that point where they were happy with what these IDSPs could do to prove that. And then once that was in place, it seemed to sort of carry on, and they were quite sort of confident that it could work, and were happy for it to continue.
Yeah, and Kelly, one of the things we spoke about quite significantly was this is really beneficial for organisations, isn't it, where they have really high volume intake. So they might go through graduate recruitment campaigns, or they might work in the retail or hospitality space where they need to take people on quite quickly, but also at their assessment centres or something like that, they might need a yes on somebody's right to work very, very quickly. So this has really been beneficial on that front as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, really enabling quicker recruitment, faster onboarding, obviously, but like we touched on, near enough instant results in some cases. So yeah.
And I think that
Big
leads on
changes.
to my next question for you, Kelly, is what role do you think technology has to play in right to work solutions today? And from that, we talk about the entirety of the right to work solution, and how does that embed within the checks that all of the employers are doing. So I know lots of the people on the call today, knowing them and having chatted to them pre the webinar, they do lots of different types of checks. They might do referencing, they might do financial checks, they might do criminal record checks. How are we seeing now that right to work is really becoming part of that overall onboarding journey, rather than just that standalone check that maybe it might have been before it was created digitally?
Yeah, I think the biggest change that we've seen, obviously, with conversations with our customers, is that it allowed this better streamlining. Obviously, with the tech comes complete automation in many cases. So I think what was most obvious when we started looking at it back when the legislation changed is that it not only allowed the streamlining to allow that automation and the data capture, but it enabled that part of the process to happen much, much quicker than it ever has before. And it's usually obviously the first step into the rest of the screening that could be required. So typically in the past, where that was happening maybe days into onboarding, sometimes even weeks, like we keep saying, that's near enough instant, or certainly we're down to hours and days. So yeah, there's loads of other benefits. Obviously, speed and efficiency is the first part of that, but with that automation, you get all of the other benefits. So the compliance, obviously, is meeting all of the requirements, there's no doubt there. And obviously the records that come with that. So removing the paper trail completely, we know that tech is keeping that result. With that
And yet
comes
it's still
other
fully
benefits.
auditable, isn't it?
Yeah, fully auditable, and that's the main benefits. But then what it also allows is the tracking of the expiry dates moving forward, and that's not just with UK. That's with all of the scope of candidates that we're talking about. Applying that automation and the tech just allows you to keep that record ready for audit, knowing that it's compliant.
And I think, putting my ex-recruiter's hat on, there's probably nothing more frustrating than having worked with a candidate, whether it be a high volume candidate or whether it be a candidate that, there's maybe, we used to call them, they were very specific, unique candidates we'd spent a long time taking through a recruitment process. There's nothing more frustrating than getting to the end of that journey and finding out that somebody's not got the right documents to work in the UK. So being able to know right at the very beginning that individual has the right to work in the UK, and then it just forms part of that individual's natural onboarding journey, it's positive for the candidate, the client. Internally, you have that reassurance that as a HR or a talent function, that everything will run through that auditable process. And I think, question for both of you, we're seeing more compliance, certainly from a digital perspective, aren't we? That the candidates that are travelling through the system genuinely are providing the right documents. They're, the very few fraudulent or failed checks coming through at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think we touch on this in the next question. It's something that the candidates are very used to, and yeah, the success rate that we're seeing is very, very, very high as they come through. And then, whilst there are, there'll always be documents found here and there. That's exactly what the service is for. But we're seeing some really good results. That doesn't stop the recruitment. It allows everything else to move forward quickly from there.
Yeah. And John, over to you. What role do you think
Sorry.
technology's got to play in solutions like right to work today?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing is, where this was primarily a service that was, for remote workers, what we're seeing is organizations are using it for even when someone's coming into the office and they're going to see them face to face. They've got the right to work confirmation before they've even started.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably the worst one. It took me about a week to remember to bring my passport in when I started at Yoti. But, with the right to work, the digital route, it's done. It's, you can do it from home. You don't even have to worry about bringing your passport. And you're not got copies of people's passports everywhere. It's in one platform. It's, going back to the compliance, so we're seeing more companies using it just for every check. It's not just the remote workers, it's anyone, even if they're seeing them face to face.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the compliance element is there then in either case. I think that's what's most important to employers, obviously, is the compliance as well as the speed.
Yeah. And Kelly, how do you think that the technology has enhanced the experience of the candidate from a right to work perspective?
again, lots of different ways. I think what we're seeing when we hear from our candidates coming through this journey is, again, speed and efficiency. Candidates these days, whether it's recruitment or any other accreditation or application process that they're going through, digital checks are very part of the norm these days. And I think a year on from this, we've seen that, you know, the questions have diminished. Everyone's on board. So yeah, we've got the speed and efficiency for them, for the candidates, you know, just like the recruiters need them on board. They need to move through that process. It's important to their family and to their lives.
Yeah.
So having that speed to know that they can come through same day within a few hours is having a big impact on candidates and their process. And as well as that, go on.
Sorry, Kelly. No, go on, you carry on.
No, I was just going to say, as well as that, I think the other big thing that we've noticed with the candidate feedback is they get to see the process. Obviously, it's fully transparent. They're moving through that journey. They know where they're at. There's screening and right to work checks can sometimes quite often be quite an anxious experience just for the very nature of the check, regardless of what we're looking at. But it just takes all of that away. They know where they're at. They can see if it's right, if it's wrong, if they need to do more. And it just helps that process when they need to know where they're at going through a really important recruitment process.
Yeah.
And obviously the main benefit is remote, because like we've touched on several times, it's easier for them.
And I think one thing I would say is, you know, maybe IDSP aside slightly, but for me, the fact that it's now really clearly defined which channel a candidate would go through, for me, almost makes it that little bit more inclusive. So sometimes, and I know from experience, from my own personal experience when I've seen it at lots of different clients over the years, if an individual turns up with a visa that isn't necessarily known to the individual who's validating it, there's a little bit of a period of time where those people are going, hang on, I need to check this visa, or I need to understand what your right to work is. And then there's the feeling that individual goes through, they probably know they've got the right to work, they've worked somewhere else historically. Whereas I feel like with this approach, it's very, very clearly defined. If you have a valid passport and you're British and Irish, you go through one route. Everybody else, and that can include British passports that are expired, so individuals who are British or Irish on an expired passport, they still need to go through the second channel. But it means that there's that little bit more inclusivity for people who don't sit within that British or Irish population, because there are now really clear routes as to how those documents are validated. And it's not a case of on day one somebody scrambling around trying to understand what the right to work of that specific visa might be during that period. So that probably, from my perspective, has helped really enhance that candidate experience. John, have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think candidates like the fact that they're going through this the proper procedure of using an approved company to do it. It gives them that assurance that, you know, oh, this company's checking all my documents properly. And you know, and people now are so familiar with opening up a Monzo bank account, or they're familiar with this procedure. You know, take a photo of your ID document, do the selfie. So it's quite a normal thing for people to do now, and they expect it. You know, if you walked into somewhere and it's, oh, we'll take a photocopy or scan of your passport, it's quite an old sort of fashioned method. You know, well, where's that going? What are you doing with that copy? You know, that's my passport detail. So I think it does give them assurance as well.
I know I went somewhere the other day and they asked for a scanned copy of my passport, and I thought, oh, I've not done this for a really long time. So yeah, it's interesting how things are evolving, and maybe some of the reluctance that we had from some clients right at the very beginning when they were trying to understand how this will impact them and their business was around individuals who aren't maybe as tech savvy, or they don't necessarily utilize applications or anything like that on a daily basis. But now, you know, more than 12 months on, we are seeing that is almost very, very minimal numbers of people who do struggle, you know, and those people obviously have the appropriate support channels to support them, whether that be directly with the customer or through a service provider. But you know, we're certainly seeing less people struggle with it than probably was the initial concern, aren't we?
Yeah. One thing to add, that's just when you mentioned fairness and equality, I think, and this was something that we spoke about right at the beginning, the fairness and equality for all candidates, regardless of the scope or the documentation that's coming through, is obviously really important to this process. But before IDVT, there was a digital version or a digital check for non-UK. Obviously, we've got the share code, the employer's check-in service. That was a very digital process. And now this brings that more fair and inclusive service to the UK candidates who typically in the past couldn't have any kind of digital check. So while some still need to go through that if they're not in scope, no current passport, it's still bringing it together to make sure everyone's going through the same recruitment and onboarding process.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll open up for questions if anybody has got any specific
We've got
questions.
I think there's
Yeah,
a nice easy one to start. So got a question. What is IDVT and how does it differ from IDSP? Obviously, I'm just happy to take the brief change or difference between those, but you might want to take that one, John. But just obviously from my point of view, I think the simplest way that we can talk about that is IDVT is the technology and IDSP is the supplier that provides that technology to allow us. So Yoti are our IDSP providing the IDVT technology to facilitate the checks.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So any company has to go through an accreditation process to become an approved IDSP, and if you meet the requirements of the government, then you are able to offer that service.
Right. Okay. There's some comments that have come through saying some companies still want wet signatures. Not a lot of people have printers at home anymore. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Not a lot. I certainly don't have a printer at home anymore. I've got very, very little need for one. Each company will have their own requirement as to whether they still want a wet signature or not. But certainly from a digital identity verification perspective, there is no need if an individual has travelled through a digital solution, they've met the criteria of that digital solution, there's no need for a wet signature anymore. It is purely down to company's choice if they choose to do that themselves, but there's no legal requirement anymore. That legal onus can be outsourced now for British and Irish passport holders.
There's a misconception about wet look signatures that they're more compliant than a sort of a printed one, but legally they're exactly the same. So with our eSign platform, it's just a visual thing. It just people have that comfort of it looks like a signature.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real, that's a whole topic of debate. That's a webinar on its own, that one, signatures, I think. Is there any other questions that might have come up whilst we've been going
Yeah,
through?
we've got another one. So how long does the check normally or typically take? So we've touched on it, it can be instant, and we really are talking about minutes in some respect with certain candidates that come through. But overall, I think the technology here is taking it down from days and weeks, having to arrange appointments and bring your documents into hours and sometimes days, but typically hours and minutes. And again, instant right to work checks in some cases. There's another question about how we work to make the candidate experience great. Now, obviously, I don't want to talk too much about our right to work process, but keep it overall. I think the key thing that I'd like to say here is obviously the candidate experience is the most important part of any screening process, and for this it's all about the automation. I think the key thing for employers to think about is where it sits within the process when enabled. So yeah. Typically the candidates coming through, maybe we're requesting that check day 2, day 3, sometimes even a bit later, and it often feels a bit disjointed. So all what we do and throughout everything else that we'll talk about in these webinars is just enabling that candidate experience, bringing it right to the forefront, capturing the right data at the right time, and getting close to that instant validation, not just for the candidate, but for our customers as well. But we'll touch on most of the candidate journey outside of right to work in future webinars as well, no doubt.
So I've actually found where the questions are now. I was having a moment, I was thinking, where's she getting all of these questions from? I have since found out where the questions are. So just in relation to, Natalie's asked a question there, are there any system stroke CRMs that you have already integrated into? Yes, the answer to that is yes, Natalie. We have front and back end integrations as part of the screening solution. So whether that be into ATSs, whether that be into time and attendance systems, it's very easily put into place. It's a very small piece of development work into an open-ended API that can be done, but the answer to that question is yes, we have already integrated into a number of those systems. Another question from Alice. John, this is probably coming more towards you, I would imagine. Are there any plans to expand IDVT to other nationalities outside of British and Irish in the near future, or merge the share code process into IDVT to streamline the checks? Put my tongue back in my mouth.
There isn't at the moment, and that's purely down to the Home Office. That's nothing that an IDSP's got any control over. We can only work within the guidelines that are set out. we would like there to be, so that we can offer different options like the shared code service, where we could integrate that, and you could do the journey through there. But at the moment they're kept very separate, and it's very, it's the rules are very set, and we can't go out of those, the boundaries of that. So there isn't anything at the moment, but that's, we're always in conversation. There are things always changing, so that could well be something that suddenly, in a very short time, does suddenly get announced that there is some changes coming.
It's always
but not
very
at this
quick,
moment.
isn't it?
It's either everything or nothing. It's like
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's another question here, and it's an interesting question, and again we'll take your thoughts on it, John. So do you have to have a phone for IDSP? Now, for me, on that one, there's a couple of different options. So an individual can either complete it on a laptop and a tablet and then transition to take a selfie image via a QR code that's presented on the screen. So that will then take the selfie image, or they can fill it in completely in its entirety on their phone. But what would be the circumstance if an individual didn't have a phone? Would they still be able to transition through IDSP?
Yeah, so you can do it through your computer, through your webcam.
They'd have to just upload an image or do through webcam imagery.
It would have to be a webcam, yeah. I mean, we always recommend a smartphone, because the cameras on them now are, like basically professional cameras, are much better than a webcam. So it gives us a much higher image resolution. But it can be done just through a computer if it's got a reasonable webcam.
Okay, great.
We do actually see we see the majority of checks done through smartphones. It's a much higher percentage than it is through a laptop or a computer.
And we always find as well, education is massive. So as long as you can explain to somebody and give them the details, or you work with your internal talent and HR teams around what information the candidate needs to go through that check, i.e. all four corners of the passport, make sure that when you're taking your selfie, your face is fully visible. We always find that education is better than going back and having to correct something once it's been done wrong. So we always opt for that option, and that really does help.
Education is the biggest thing that can help. It makes a massive difference. We see customers, they put a bit of education in the beginning of a flow, and the results can dramatically change for the results.
That's one of the main benefits of the automation, really, isn't it? Is building that system guidance, having the help text there, guiding them through the process, which is often needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, somebody asked what the benefits of the outsource part of it was earlier. I think, again, that is a massive benefit from an outsourcing perspective, because, outsourced providers, whether it's Giant, whether it's any other provider, whether it's an IDSP provider, they see this day in, day out. They're able to provide that structure and guidance and methodology to get the best results out of those candidates during the quickest time frames. So I think that's always a really positive benefit as well. So are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, there are a couple more that have come through.
We've got two more. So I think the first one is, do we think that the Home Office will eventually drop the imposter check requirements when using IDBT? So that's obviously when the candidate has gone through, they've met the requirements, we've got that positive result, right to work is confirmed. There is that final tick box essentially that takes place either on day one, or it can be obviously on video call before they start. And that's just that final reassurance step internally for you guys that doesn't need to be recorded officially as part of the start excuse. The requirements met have given us that response. So I'm not sure what your thoughts are. Maybe you know a little bit more about the plans for that, John. But
there's as far as I know, there's no plans, but I can't see them stopping that, because we can verify someone, and it can be an absolutely genuine passport, and they are the same person that's uploaded it, and everything checks out. But we've had situations where someone's done a right to work check, but then someone else has turned up on a site or something to do the job, and it's become quite clear quite quickly that they're not the qualified person that they was expecting. And if you're working in a dangerous environment, that could be quite severe. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. And that is a very easy process. That's a video call, or just, oh yes, you're the same person. So it doesn't really require a lot of effort from that side of things.
I think for me as well, and maybe seeing what I've seen over the years, I probably would encourage them not to take that away. you absolutely want to ensure that that person is the person that is presenting those documents to you for lots of different reasons, as John's just said there. But I think as well, that also goes towards a company's modern slavery agenda. So being able to validate that that individual can present their documents to you at a point where they're requested will certainly go towards that modern slavery agenda and the protection of that workforce as well. So I think it's really important that that type of check is in place.
I think that leads into maybe the last question, actually, which is at what point does the responsibility and liability fall between the recruiter and the end employer for conducting the right to work check properly? So if we're coming at it from that, looking at that that final check, that is always going to be the responsibility of the employer, the party that is seeing them on day one, or like we've said beforehand. So I think that once you've got that result in place, obviously the requirement will always be with the employer to give that final statutory excuse held on file.
Yeah, I think the only slight deviation to that is that if it's a contractor placement and they're a PAYE contractor engaging through an agency, that are effectively their employer, their payroller. And I think the liability on that one will always remain with the agency, but I think that's the only deviation away from that.
We've actually got a little comment on that question that does say for both permanent recruitment and contract recruitment.
Okay.
So I think we've covered both there.
So for permanent, it will always sit with the employer. The employer can choose to go through either any of the routes that we spoke about today. For a contingent worker or a contract worker, if they're PAYE, it stays with the agency. If they're a limited company worker, again, it often stays with the agency, but there are some circumstances where it would go with the end employer. Are there any other questions? If not, we'll thank you for your time. Hopefully you found our second webinar helpful and interesting and informative during your lunch hour. John, thank you very much for taking the time out to join us. John is actually going to appear again later on in the year when we talk about DBS checks and how DBS and right to work can integrate. So that's an episode to look out for as the year goes on. Our next episode is on the 30th of November, again, same time, 12:30. And it's really interesting one, this one, candidate experience within the background screening sector. So again, we'll welcome you to join us for that. So thank you all very much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.